Princess Anya was never meant to rule. The traditions of the Kingdom of Zanthia, carved into the foundation stones of the Ethelgard citadel, were clear. The throne passed through the male line. As the only child of the ailing King Theron, she was seen as a tragic endpoint to a glorious dynasty. While courtiers whispered about which distant cousin would inherit, Anya found solace not in politics, but in the royal library. She spent her days with ink-stained fingers, tracing coastlines on unfinished maps and translating forgotten dialects from crumbling scrolls. Her world was one of logic, history, and the quiet rustle of parchment. Her father, a kind but weary man, had encouraged her studies, perhaps as a way to arm her for a life of dignified obscurity. He saw the sharpness of her mind, a tool considered unbefitting a queen but perfect for an archivist or a royal advisor. On this day, as rain lashed against the tall, arched windows of her library spire, she was studying the geological surveys of the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. She wasn't preparing for a crown. She was preparing a treatise on mineral deposits. But below, in the king's chambers, the royal physicians were shaking their heads. The king's time was short, and the storm gathering over Zanthia was far more than meteorological. Anya's quiet world of books and maps was about to be torn apart by the one thing she had always been allowed to ignore: destiny. King Theron's death was announced by a single, tolling bell that echoed through the stone courtyards of Ethelgard. Before the sound had fully faded, the royal council was convened in the Hall of Echoes, a cavernous chamber dominated by a polished obsidian table. Anya, dressed in stark black mourning clothes, sat at the head of the table, not as a ruler, but as a grieving daughter. The seat of power was symbolically empty. The challenge to her future came not with a sword, but with a silver tongue. Lord Valerius, the High Chancellor and leader of the dogmatic order of the Sunstone, rose to speak. He was handsome, charismatic, and his voice dripped with feigned sympathy. "We mourn a great king," he began, his eyes sweeping over the assembled lords. "But we must not let our grief cloud our duty to the sacred laws of Zanthia. The Sunstone Charter is clear. The throne cannot pass to a woman. It would be an abomination, an invitation for chaos." He spoke of stability, tradition, and divine will, his words weaving a net around Anya. She watched as lords who had sworn loyalty to her father now nodded in agreement, their fear of instability outweighing their fealty. Anya did not speak. She simply listened, her analytical mind dissecting their arguments, noting their allegiances, and seeing the carefully constructed trap Valerius was laying. She was outnumbered and outmaneuvered, a scholar in a room of political predators. In the week that followed, Zanthia existed in a state of limbo. Valerius, as High Chancellor, effectively ruled, issuing decrees and managing the state while the succession was deliberated. He insisted Anya make a public appearance at the market square for her father's memorial, a calculated move to expose her weakness. The people of Ethelgard, fed a steady diet of Valerius's rhetoric about tradition and the dangers of a female ruler, were uncertain. They loved King Theron, but his daughter was a mystery. When Anya appeared on the balcony of the Grand Guildhall, she looked small and out of place. She didn't offer soaring rhetoric or divine promises. Instead, she spoke quietly and plainly about her father's love for his people and his belief in a just future. She spoke of granary reforms and trade routes, the practical things she understood. To the scholars and merchants, her words were refreshingly intelligent. But to the common folk, accustomed to the pageantry of power, she sounded less like a monarch and more like a clerk. Valerius, standing a few feet behind her, watched with a smirk. He had positioned her perfectly, a bookish girl trying to fill a warrior king's shoes. As she finished her short, heartfelt speech, the applause was scattered and hesitant. She saw the doubt in their eyes, and for the first time, felt the crushing weight of a crown she did not yet wear and might never win. Anya knew she could not fight Valerius in the council or in the court of public opinion. He controlled the narrative. She needed a different kind of power. Late one night, cloaked and hooded, she slipped out of the citadel through a secret passage known only to the royal family. Her destination was the barracks on the city's edge, the headquarters of General Kalen, the grizzled and fiercely loyal commander of the Xanthian army. Kalen had served her father for 40 years and viewed the Chancellor's ambition with undisguised contempt. He found her waiting in the stables, the scent of hay and horsehide thick in the air. He didn't bow but gave a short, respectful nod. "Princess, this is a dangerous game you're playing," he rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "Valerius has the law, the priests, and the fear of the people," Anya stated, getting straight to the point. "What do you have, General?" Kalen's eyes, set in a face like a weathered map, met hers. "I have 5,000 soldiers who swore an oath to your father. An oath to the crown, not to the Chancellor's ambition. They are loyal to the blood of Theron." In that moment, an alliance was forged not on paper, but on shared loyalty and mutual respect. He saw not a frightened girl, but her father's resolve. She saw not just a soldier, but the only piece on the board that Valerius did not control. The path forward was still treacherous, but it was no longer entirely dark. Valerius was no fool. He heard the whispers of the general's loyalty and saw that Anya's quiet defiance was not breaking. A direct military confrontation would be bloody and unpredictable. So he devised a more elegant and, in his mind, foolproof solution. He invoked the most sacred and ancient rite of Xanthian law, the trial of Ascension. At the next council meeting, he proposed it with theatrical solemnity. "Let the gods decide," he declared. "The Sunstone of our ancestors lies dormant in the grand cathedral. Legend states it will glow with the light of the heavens for the true and rightful heir. Let the princess and a worthy male claimant, I humbly propose myself as a servant of the kingdom, approach the stone. Whomever it chooses shall be our monarch, and all will be bound by its divine judgment." The council, torn between civil war and this seemingly divine alternative, eagerly agreed. It was a brilliant trap. The Sunstone hadn't glowed in 5 centuries. It was now just a symbol, a dead rock. Valerius knew it wouldn't glow for anyone. When it failed for both of them, he could argue that the gods had rejected the old dynasty entirely, paving the way for the election of a new leader, himself. He watched Anya for her reaction. To his surprise, she calmly accepted. "Let it be so," she said, her voice steady. He mistook her composure for naive acceptance of her fate. Valerius believed the Sunstone legend was simple folklore to be exploited. Anya, the scholar, knew that folklore was merely history that had forgotten its own details. While Valerius rallied public support for the coming trial, Anya returned to her sanctuary, the library. She didn't look for military strategy or legal loopholes. She searched for the truth of the Sunstone. For 3 days and nights, aided by a few loyal librarians, she unearthed the most obscure texts. Texts the Order of the Sunstone had long dismissed as heresy or fantasy. In a dusty tome titled Geologies of the First Kings, she found it. The Sunstone was not magic, not in the way Valerius believed. It was a unique, photoreceptive crystal, mined from a meteor crater deep in the northern mountains. The book described a small, accompanying lodestone, the key, that was lost to history. More importantly, she found a collection of poems from the reign of Queen Hespera, the only other regnant queen in Xanthia's history, a ruler so successful her reign had been mythologized. The poems didn't speak of blood right. They spoke of attunement. The Sunstone did not respond to lineage, but to a specific frequency, a resonant hum that could be produced by a combination of voice and contact with the key. The final piece fell into place when she found a schematic of her own father's signet ring. Disguised within its intricate design was a tiny, magnetic shard of rock. The lost key. It hadn't been lost at all, just hidden in plain sight. The day of the trial of Ascension was a grand spectacle. The great cathedral of Ethelgard was filled to bursting, with thousands more crammed into the plaza outside. General Kalen's soldiers maintained a tense peace. The Sunstone sat on its dais before the high altar, dark and silent as a tombstone. Valerius, dressed in the immaculate white and gold robes of his order, approached first. He was the picture of confidence, placing his hand on the stone and reciting the traditional prayer, his powerful voice filling the cathedral. Nothing happened. The crowd murmured. This was expected. Valerius stepped back with a humble shrug, as if to say, "The gods are not with me, but I tried." Then it was Anya's turn. She walked forward, not in a gown, but in a simple dark dress of a scholar. She looked small against the vastness of the altar. She placed her left hand on the stone. Then, with her right, she touched her father's signet ring to a specific point on its surface, a point marked on the ancient diagrams. She did not pray aloud. Instead, she began to hum, a low, resonant frequency she had practiced from the poetic notations. A gasp rippled through the crowd. A faint, internal glimmer appeared within the Sunstone. As her hum grew steadier and clearer, the glimmer intensified, pulsing in time with her breath. It grew from a flicker to a warm glow, then into a brilliant, golden light that filled the entire cathedral, casting the stained glass windows into sharp relief and bathing every face in its divine radiance. The silence was absolute, broken only by a single, sharp intake of breath from Lord Valerius. The brilliant light of the Sunstone did more than just illuminate the cathedral. It shattered Valerius's power base. The effect was immediate and seismic. For the common people and most of the nobility, this was a divine miracle, an unambiguous sign from the heavens. The whispers of Queen Anya started in the back rows and grew into a deafening roar of acclamation. General Kaelin's soldiers, who had been tense and ready for a fight, now knelt as one. But the Order of the Sunstone, Valerius's personal army of zealots and priests, was thrown into chaos. For them, this was impossible, a perversion of their most sacred beliefs. Some fell to their knees, weeping, accepting the divine judgment and renouncing their former master. They saw the light and believed. Others, the most fanatic of Valerius's inner circle, saw it as dark magic, a scholar's trickery, a heresy of the highest order. They looked to Valerius for guidance, but he was frozen, his mind unable to process his public humiliation. As Anya, now bathed in the stone's fading, gentle light, turned to face the crowd, several of these hardline priests drew concealed daggers. Before they could move, they were surrounded by Kaelin's guards, their weapons clattering on the stone floor. The Order of the Sunstone, once the most powerful political force in Zanthia, had fractured in a single moment, breaking into believers and traitors. Anya's coronation was held a week later. She was crowned not with the heavy, ornate crown of her male ancestors, but with a simple golden circlet she had designed herself, inlaid with a single polished stone from her library's geological collection. Her first act as queen was not one of vengeance, which all expected, but one of startling clemency and wisdom. Standing before the council, now reformed and with many new faces, she issued her first decree. "The Order of the Sunstone is hereby dissolved," she announced, her voice clear and firm. "Its wealth and lands shall be repurposed to fund public works and a new royal university, open to all regardless of birth. Any member of the former order who swears a new oath of fealty to the crown shall be pardoned. Their faith is their own, but their political power is at an end." She made no exception for Valerius. He was declared a traitor and banished from Zanthia on pain of death, stripped of all titles and lands. He was escorted to the border by a small detachment of Kaelin's men and left with nothing but the clothes on his back. Her second act was to formally appoint General Kaelin as her High Chancellor and to establish a new Council of Merit, where positions would be earned by skill and knowledge, not inherited by blood. She was dismantling the very system that had tried to destroy her and rebuilding it based on the principles she held dear: logic, merit, and justice. 5 years later, the Kingdom of Zanthia was transformed. Trade flourished, fueled by the new roads and canals funded by the old order's wealth. The Royal University in Ethelgard had become a beacon of learning, drawing scholars from distant lands. Queen Anya ruled as she had studied, with careful analysis, a respect for facts, and a long-term vision. She was beloved not for her divine right, but for her tangible results: full granaries, fair taxes, and peaceful borders. The story of the Sunstone was now a cherished legend, a symbol of how wisdom could triumph over dogma. Anya was often found not in the throne room, but in a new, grand cartography workshop she had established next to the library. She stood there now, looking over a new, comprehensive map of Zanthia, its coastlines and mountains rendered with unprecedented accuracy by her university's graduates. General Kalen, his hair now completely white, stood beside her. "The kingdom is secure, Your Majesty," he said. Anya smiled, a rare but genuine expression. "A kingdom is never truly secure, old friend. It must always be learning, always be growing." She pointed to the blank parchment beyond Xanthia's borders, the vast, unknown lands to the east. "There are new mountains to survey," she said, her eyes alight with the same scholarly curiosity she'd had as a girl in the tower. "And new histories to write." The Sunstone had made her a queen, but it was her own mind that would define her reign.